What are the hacks that you've learned, like through our relationship, that help you get out of the corner, or you've seen help me get out of the corner when we're in our fights?
So if I get triggered by something in a conversation and I don't move the trigger, often what we do is compartmentalize, and then we're speaking from the trigger, and then our bodies tense up to hold on to the thing, the hit that happened in our body. And I personally will try to compensate through saying something or acting like it didn't happen or didn't affect me when it really did, and my tone gets different, and then I'm digging in, and then I'm like subtly kind of saying like, fuck you, no, it's totally okay, and fuck you. No, I'm fine, I'm not angry about anything, but fuck you. And I'm saying it not with those words, but like, no, yeah, I don't want to do that. No, okay, no, that's all you. And I'm not owning that I'm really upset. You're laughing because you recognize it.
I've been there.
Once or twice. Because the hit is in my body and hasn't gotten to move. It hasn't gotten to finish sequencing. So it's as if you got hit by something and it's kind of simmering, and like you got hit by a hot potato and it's still burning your skin. Whereas if I take the hit and let it fully sequence, rah, I get to discharge it. I get to release it. I get to not take it out on anybody. And then I think what technically happens is that emotional part of the brain calms down, the reactive part of the brain calms down, and my like executive functioning part of the brain can come back on and can actually be curious and have a conversation, and I can come back to compassion, curiosity. I can come out of my corner and actually kind of wonder like, oh, that was crazy for me. What was that like for you? Or what were you actually trying to say when I got triggered? I can, the reactive part of myself isn't there anymore. I've moved, I consider it like a charge or a hit, and I've moved the charge, and in doing so, recalibrated my whole system so I can think clearly.
Yeah, so tell me a good story about that.
I don't have a story with you, I have a story with kids. I remember Esme, we were cooking and she threw something at me, but I didn't know it was coming, so it hit me in the face. And I got really triggered and I got really angry. And I knew it was an accident logically, but I was like, I had heat in my body. And I was like, hold on 1 second, I just have to do a little dance. And
I am confident that sounded more fun than it actually sounded.
It probably sounded more like, motherfucker, that hurt. I would try not to curse in front of kids. And I was like, ah! I was like, oh, that really hurt. And I could come back and say, okay, let's try that again. Like, that really hurt. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. Let's make eye contact before we throw things to each other in the kitchen. Yeah. So I could not respond from anger.
Yeah. Okay, how did you learn it? How did you learn this trick?
How did I learn that trick? Mm-hmm. My very first introduction to hand-in-hand parenting. And I remember Patty Whiffler saying, oh, you can go tell your kids in advance, if I get triggered, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go into the room and I'm gonna press on the wall. I don't remember exactly how she said it, but I remember saying it to Esme, like, oh, if I ever get angry, it's nothing to do with you, it's my job, and this is how I'm gonna take care of it. I'm gonna go into our bedroom and I'm gonna press on this wall, and you might hear me make funny sounds like, wah, 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 or ah, and press on the wall. And I remember doing that 1 or 2 or 3 times, and like parenting got a lot easier after that. Yeah. Before that, I found myself losing my temper, having like a short fuse with the kids, or with I think we just had Esme at that moment, like having a shorter fuse, being kind of like snippy mama. And when I learned that hack, that I could go and move anger, then it was like, I'd actually do that once and I'd be settled for a week, like untriggered, unfazed, like things could get thrown at me and I'd be like, okay, that didn't work, let's try a do-over.
And how did you learn to translate that to a husband?
It was harder to figure out that emotional dance with you. I actually remember one of the first times I really learned it. We were in a car fighting about something on the East Coast, up in the mountains. No, it was before that, but we were in a car. And we were fighting about something, and you said something hot. You're like, ah, da, da, da. And I went, ah, da, 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 da. And just got angry back, and it was at you, but it wasn't really at you, and you were just like, yeah, cool. And I was like, oh, okay. I felt like you could hold it. You didn't take it personally, and I got to just move it as opposed to sit on it and hold it, which is what I did traditionally beforehand. And then it was like, oh, I could be untriggered, I could think clearly, and I could have compassion for me and for you and be like, oh, what are we doing here? What's this really about?
Yeah. And how has life been like moving, like now that like in our relationship, you take the emotions you're feeling, you move them without taking them out on anybody. How do you see the relationship having changed?
I'd say fights are much shorter. They're not really even fights because it's like trigger, rah! What'd you just say? Oh, okay. I thought you said something else. That's so funny. No, I don't want to go see a movie. Or like it's just a non-event. What would have been an event that then I layered and piled on more crap onto and went on, could have gone on for an hour, 2 hours. Maybe not the night. Sometimes though, like more like occasionally like residual overnight is now like it's not a total non-event. Like there's still something, but it moves quickly.
Yeah. How about resentment?
No. My experience is that if I'm sitting on, especially a charge like anger, that then it's not moving the charge that leads to the resentment and kind of like complaining. And if I move the charge, I don't even want to call it anger as much as like a charge or a trigger or a hit, and express it. It doesn't even have to be to you. I can express it on my own. Then like it's like I've moved it. Resentment isn't even I'm trying to search. It's not even because when the charge moves, there's no need for resentment. Usually because there's another hack that comes in, which is then I speak my truth, uncharged.
The thing that I remember about like when I first started moving emotions to like, so I wasn't triggered by you at you. I was triggered by you. I would move the emotion, but then I could come back. Was that when I first started moving the emotions, I actually started feeling it more and more. I remember like, oh, I'm like, shit, should I be doing this? Because it started to like amplify a little bit. I was a little quicker to anger at the beginning. The immediate thing is I would get angry out of the room and come back and be like there. But then I just noticed like, oh, I was a little quicker to anger generally. And I got scared about that for a while. And I realized, oh, I just had like a shit ton of backlog of anger that needed to move. And that if I was moving the anger without believing the story, it definitely moved like smoother. Whereas if I like got angry in such a way that I kept on thinking the story was true, then I actually hadn't moved the anger all the way. So part of it was learning to move the anger all the way so that I actually had real peace on the other side, a real epiphany on the other side. And then part of it was just getting a backlog of anger out of the system. Because for me, it was anger that was the piece, still is, like I'm still prone to anger quicker than any of the other emotions. And then I also remember like at the beginning, when you were leaving to go into the other room, you weren't clear about what you were doing or that was open. And I'd be like, God, feel like so abandoned, like I was gonna like fucking die or something like that. And that was like really hard for me. Like, wait, you're leaving the room. What's going on? Like you're abandoning me. Like we're supposed to fight this out and figure it out. And that was something, and it was really helpful when we learned those tricks of like, I'm going to be gone for 5 minutes. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to come back. Like open-hearted leaving instead of closed-hearted leaving. That was really useful.
And not letting the leaving be part of the anger.
Right, yeah. And not letting the leaving. That's a great way. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Not letting the leaving be part of the anger. Like a big moment for me that was really interesting in our fights and just like the anger, because we learned this like as the kids were young. And I remember that time when I was like making pancakes, and same thing, like Esme didn't throw something at me, but like the girls would always like fight. She do something, like right when the pancakes were burning and the bacon was going and the grease was splattering and the alarm was going off, and they'd be like, ah. At the time, I didn't quite know, but they're just feeling my tension and mimicking it, you know. And I went, ah. And Esme just looked at me. She's like, that was some good anger, Dad. And I remember that. And I was like, oh, this is like, there's a whole nother level here of this, which is, if I'm not getting angry at you, anger isn't something that's scary. It isn't something that's bad. It's like that the emotions are considered bad, at least in part, because of what people do with them. People think something's bad often, not because it is, like it's a neutral thing like money, but it's bad because they've had a bad experience with it. And I realized that emotions were the same way in my life. All the emotions that I thought were bad were actually just, people had just used them as a tool to manipulate me or to try to control me, and that the emotions themselves weren't bad. So that was a big realization. The other piece that was interesting for me was at the beginning, when we first like discharged emotions, it was mostly anger. Mm-hmm. But there's been times now where it's like in the middle of the fight, the thing that needs to be felt is the grief. And we can do that usually not in the other room, like with each other. But I think it was interesting. Anger was the first that we learned because we wanted to stop hurting each other. But then we started seeing how the fights themselves were these ways to like feel things that we had pushed down, and then we could feel them and be with each other. And I think it's just important to realize that it's not just anger that is the emotions that sometimes get released in a fight and that allow us to heal.
I'd say the progression actually was, in the beginning, go move anger in another room while leaking it ever so slightly on the way out. And then learning to clean it up and say, hold on, I have some anger to move. I'll be back in 3 minutes. Going to the other room and moving it so that it wasn't leaking out. And then eventually there came a time when I can remember being like, hold on, do you have a minute of space for me just to yell? And you'd be like, yeah. And I'd go, ah. And we could do it with each other in the room. And sometimes there would be leaking over on each other, and eventually, again, even there, would learn how to do it really cleanly. So there was a whole progression with anger. And then came room for the grief and the fear and other things to move. And sometimes in the same, like starting with anger, hold on, I'm just so frustrated. Do you have a minute while I move frustration? And you'd be like, yeah, go for it. And I'm like, ah. And then I'd start shaking like, oh, I'm really scared because I have no idea where we're going after this. Yeah. So those deeper emotions could come out too. And the more we did it, the easier it got to hold space for each other.
Yeah, that's for sure.